From the Marquee Media Studio inside Mark Tank, it's the Mark Haney Show.
Yes, this is the Mark Haney Show on a mission to ignite the entrepreneurial revolution right here in the hometown we love, and we do that by building the Backyard Advantage, the most connected community in the world for local entrepreneurs. Yeah, you've heard all that, but today is going to be special. There's probably been a ton of times with all of us where you wish you had an expert in a certain area of the law, in building a business or in anywhere. And today we get some free expert advice from Sheila Carroll. She is the owner, senior attorney at Carroll Associates, and she's a member of the Entrepreneurs Organization, and she does a lot to help businesses. So today should be fun. We'll get to know an attorney, and it'll make us feel like we have access to a regular human being. A lot of times, especially like on doctors or attorneys in certain professions, we're like, it's kind of nervous. But we're gonna keep this light. We're gonna keep it fun. I'm a C student from a local high school here, Oakmont, and you were mentioning, Sheila, before the show that the C students in law make all the money. What grades did you get?
Totally true. Well, frankly, I got a lot of C's. I got some A's too.
So you're making some money.
I was on law review. I did some special things on the intellectual side, but yeah, I was pretty C. So I went for making the money.
Yeah. Okay, so now I'm kind of wondering, what type of person decides to be an attorney? I was talking to my granddaughter, who is, at the time she was a little bit younger. Like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she says, I want to be a lawyer. And I'm like, why? She's like, I like to argue. And I'm like, were you like, is that true?
Absolutely.
What kind of person becomes a lawyer?
Comment. Exactly the same comment, because my dad always wanted to know why I wanted to be an attorney. It's like, because I like to argue. I also like to write. I'd once thought of being a journalist, but I like to argue too. So you get to do both. It's very hopefully polite arguing, but it's definitely arguing and, finding all the points that can help you be an advocate for somebody, right? And there are a lot of different ways to do that.
I love it. Okay, so what made you, I'm just going to get a little bit of your background here. We were sharing, you've got kids, married, grandkids, but what made you decide to get into the law? So it sounds like you were doing some other things prior.
I was, although I've been a lawyer for a long time. This is my 36th year of practice, right? Law school was a few years. The first thing I did was I owned a plant storing greenhouses. And that was sort of a vehicle to get to law school. I worked my way through undergraduate, and a friend wanted to go into business, and we ended up trying to come up with something we could do. Like we didn't have a ton of skills yet, right? We're both in business school trying to figure life out. So time goes on, it's like, I've always known how to grow plants, right? As a little kid, I didn't have a lemonade stand. I had a plant stand. I'd sell my little cuttings.
Nice.
So I knew I could do that.
You're entrepreneurial.
So from the beginning, right? From the beginning. So that was a blast. I mean, we ended up having a store that was retail, but then we imported, and then we had greenhouses. So it went on pretty well. In fact, today is a going concern. I sold it to my business partner. He then sold it to one of our employees who's down in Southern California in Upland, and it's still there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Nice to see a company stay alive through different ownerships.
Right. It was fun. The Plant Safari. It was 1989 when you started it.
And then did somebody inspire you to want to be an attorney, or how did that happen?
I didn't know a lot of attorneys growing up. It was something I saw on TV and movies, and it just seemed really interesting. And watching someone argue to a jury was really fascinating to me, and watching someone be an advocate was really fascinating to me too. The idea of having someone's back all the way through a process is super important.
Well, I was thinking about this a little bit ago, like, what are we going to talk about? And I've been in one lawsuit that I can think of, and it ended kind of quickly. They sued us, and they didn't have a claim. We countersued, and they committed fraud, and they settled. And it lasted a month or two, and it was really stressful. And then I know people, you and I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and it seems like every time I talk to a small business person or an entrepreneur that is in a lawsuit, it is so stressful, and they last 6 months, 12 months, 24 months. It takes years off your life when you're in something that stressful for that long of a period of time.
It does.
So like when someone comes in and they feel like, but I also hear, and you may not hear this as much, but, oh, that guy, I should sue him. You hear that kind of stuff all the time.
Right.
And I'm just like, yeah, it's going to last forever. You're going to hate, you're not going to want that decision, right? That type of thing.
Yeah. Our court system is not perfect. I'm fortunate with my practice. Part of my practice is transactional. I put deals together, but I do litigate quite a bit, and I go to trial, and that is breaking down that deal, right? So I see both sides of it, and I try to keep people out of litigation by drafting the right deal, by giving them good advice, by keeping them out of court. But it happens that people end up in court. Hopefully not from my deals, not usually, but from other deals. And that is very stressful, and managing it is really hard. What you did sounds like was the perfect ending. It was, you got sued, which was unfortunate. Doesn't sound like it was your fault. It sounds like there were some issues. I heard the word fraud.
Yeah, there was
and there was
a signature that was backdated, and it was. Yeah, I don't want to get into it, but it was. No. We get a handwriting expert and some things like that. And it's like, oh, they dated we got the date of the ink, and it was like,
catching that early is really important because it is incredibly stressful. Our system is a little bit broken down, and that litigation takes too long and costs too much money, and it's incredible stress for a business owner. So when we get a case, where someone's being sued, we assess it, try to triage it, try to figure out the best way to get them through it. If we can resolve it early and upfront and easily, we do that. If we have to go through trial, we can, but it takes so much out of an owner. And the biggest thing it takes out of an entrepreneur is it takes you away from your good ideas. Yeah. You don't have time to think. You're obsessed with this monster under the bed that really isn't under the bed anymore. It's in your face, right? So it's kind of tough.
Yeah, it's amazing how, entrepreneurs inherently, we chase shiny objects. So we already have the propensity to become distracted. Mm-hmm. But when we're stressed about something that's like important to the business, but not the key driver of the business, it can just take everything away from your ability to lead people, and your imagination, all that kind of stuff.
Right. So part of what a good lawyer can do is help you put that in a box during the time you don't have to deal with it.
Okay.
Manage it for them. Be sure they know that you're working on it. Let them know when there's something that's their job, but a lot of that lawsuit is my job, not their job, right? So try to separate that out. For some of my entrepreneurs who feel really stressed out by lawsuits, I'll agree on a day of the week or a time of day that I'll communicate with them. So they know that they aren't going to have this thing land in their inbox that's just going to blow their whole mind, right? Those boundaries kind of help people, I found, get through it.
Yeah, so. Interesting. Yeah, compartmentalizing something so stressful, I think makes a lot of sense. And, you don't want to take it home with you. You just don't want to deal with it all the time. But back to you becoming an attorney, what do you love about the job? Because when it sounds like, you like to argue, it sounds like my granddaughter. She's not a big arguer, but as she says she is. But I think she envisions the litigation, the courtroom, and the drama. And some people aren't built for that. That takes a certain type of human, a very good communicator, somebody who's not concerned about public speaking and things like that. So is that a part of the job you like because do you thrive in that environment, or what part do you like? You said
So I do thrive in the environment where I'm in front of people talking to a jury or talking to an opposing counsel or talking to a judge or even engaging with that client, right? I like the people part of it. I like the reasoning part of it a lot too. I like taking an idea and looking at all sides of it and kind of tearing it apart and putting myself in this side of the opposition and figure out what they're thinking, right? So it's a whole strategy game. When I was a kid, I liked playing chess. It's a lot like a really great game of chess, right? With words and language. And I've always liked words and language too, so that makes it fun. And when you mentioned you have a granddaughter who argues, but you said not really, to some of us, argument it's a conversation style you have to accomplish a goal, to persuade to get something done. It's not necessarily mean. And I think when you said, well, she doesn't argue, you probably meant, I'm guessing you meant, she's not a bad kid. She's not difficult.
Right.
But to some of us, argument isn't difficult. Argument can be kind of beautiful. It is the way you get through issues, and it brings home that fact that we all know hard conversations are sometimes the best conversations, right? Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I imagine if you have a witness on the stand, it's let's say an opposing witness, there's a lot of discovery. You mentioned chess, and it's like thinking on your feet. You might discover something in real time in the courtroom. You don't have it in deposition. You're discovering it while somebody's on the stand, and you have to make a chess move real time.
Exactly. And we don't like that to happen. We like to do discovery ahead of time and find out everything. But you're right. You can never figure out everything in advance, right? So it is about connecting with that person to figure out how to ask them the question to get the proper information, right? Keeping them on track, and at the same time, keeping that judge or jury engaged. So there are a lot of things going on, as well as being quick. You're trying to relate to that witness enough, even if they're an opposing witness. If you treat them the right way, they may react better for you. Some do better if I'm a little pushy. Some do better if I'm very kind. Often a witness, because of my stature, I'm not very big. People expect me to be incredibly soft and incredibly nice, and maybe they saw me be nice to the last 3 witnesses, but if it's not working, that's going to turn and it's going to change, and that sometimes is effective too.
Can you ever tell if people are lying? I mean, can you tell like by their body language? I've got this. I'm staying on this one based upon their demeanor.
Some people lie really well. So I can't always, which is why I try to get information. I'd like to say I can, but the problem with people lying is that a lot of good liars have convinced themselves that a fact is a truth. And once they believe it, then they don't look like they're lying anymore. So it's like a lie detection machine.
Right.
If you believe that lie, so in litigation, I shouldn't be as harsh as to call it a lie. Sometimes it's reasonable minds differ. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we deal with lies. The example you just gave was a lie, right? A clear lie.
Right.
Sometimes we have reasonable minds differ, especially in most business cases, right? So that's really tough because each side believes they are right. So the jury has to be a little more thoughtful in figuring out whose matter syncs up better with the law, whose facts made sense for the law.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to I'm going to put my entrepreneur hat on for a second, because I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and I am some businesses. And one of the common questions I get is, well, you probably get this every day, but what structure should I set up for my business? I'm starting a business. I got a good idea. And should I be an LLC? Should I be an S-Corp? Should I be a C-Corp? Should I be a Delaware C-Corp? Should I do sole proprietorship? How do you break that down so that people can manage their risk and manage their, tax liability, and maybe even set their businesses up to raise money if they want to go get venture capital?
So I do deal with that every day.
You do?
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, in terms of business structure and how it should be structured. And and I use a lot of charts to help people, because people learn all different ways, right? But if we start with talking about structures, the main reason for being a type of a limited liability company, so an LLC or corporation of any kind, right, is to give an extra layer of protection to your assets if something goes awry, right? And insurance is very important to any business doing anything, in our state in particular, right? So insurance covers some things, but that'll cover negligence things and accident things. But what about if a contract goes wrong? Supply chain contract error is something we saw a lot of in the pandemic, and it's something we're going to see now with tariffs, right? Supplies aren't going to come when you want them to, and you committed to hundreds of thousands of dollars for this thing you now don't need because you figured out how to do something else.
What about it costs twice as much because I got a tariff on it now? I got to raise the price to my customer. Well, you're under contract,
right? Exactly. So what are you going to do? But contract liability can be protected and limited to some extent by having some sort of corporate structure. When I say corporate structure, that actually includes limited liability companies. So in terms of deciding between limited liability company, S-Corp, and C-Corp, it depends on a few things, including if you're going to raise money or not, but that's a step that may not be happening immediately for you. If it's immediate, you're probably going to be a C. That's a little more unusual to immediately raise money, but it certainly happens with a lot of great big ideas. S-Corps for someone who has a smaller setup, but if you've got a few business partners and they want to use that pass-through taxation, which is advantageous now. We don't know what's going to happen with the tax code, though. There's some sunsetting laws. So if you want to have that pass-through taxation, if you have different ownership interests, it's almost easier with an LLC from a tax standpoint. Liability-wise, they're the same, but it just has to do with a lot of factors having to do with flexibility, I think. LLCs are super flexible, but there's an additional tax you have to look at. So there are a lot of factors you need to consider, and I walk people through those to help figure out what's best for them.
Yeah, so maybe I'll break down a couple of different types of businesses just to make it so that people, because we have people at all levels maybe watching and listening and thinking about, if I'm going to own some real estate and maybe some rental properties, so I'm a part-time landlord type person, I would probably want an LLC. That's going to give me some protection, but it can be kind of like a holding company for you.
Totally, and a nice flexible structure. So you've got your LLC, but then maybe you decide you're going to let the kids own part of the membership interest being the equivalent of a number of shares, right, for a corporation. So it's easy to just peel off percentage ownerships on those, and the accounting on that piece is easy too, right? So those are nice, and it's just an easy setup for a holding company.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word pass-through, and what we're talking about there is passing through so it shows up on your personal tax return. The corporation doesn't pay tax, and then you also pay tax. There's a double taxation on these C-Corps that can occur. So now S-Corp is taxed similarly. And so if I have a small business, let's say I'm selling plants like you were, and I'm growing it, and yet I don't see myself getting venture capital, typically we would see those people go into an S-Corp versus an LLC. From where I stand and when I'm talking to people about, is that the way that you recommend it? If people are going to be driving revenue, let's say I'm going to have a company that's 5 or 10 million in revenue, might grow big, I don't know, but it's basically going to have employees and selling stuff. Would I want a C-Corp? Because a lot of people go into and do LLCs, and I think, why?
I'd normally start with the S-Corp. You can always convert to the C, right? If you want to start for a C for certain reasons, you can, depending on how your funding structure is. But if you're opening a fairly simple business where it's just going to be a few owners or maybe just one owner, I'd start with that S-Corp because it's just the easiest in terms of taxation. You don't have what's perceived as that double tax, right? Taxing the entity and then, again, taxing the person. It just goes straight on your personal tax return, right? So that makes sense. There's also the gross receipts tax that you have for the LLCs that tips the formula a little bit when you're selling goods and services. So the S-Corp sometimes makes more sense. It usually does, and it's easy. You do get one, I'd call it free as far as the IRS is concerned, one conversion that's not considered a taxable event. So you started as an S-Corp and you want to convert it, you can. That conversion isn't going to cause you a taxable event if you've increased a lot in value. Right, and that's kind of important too. You get one freebie.
And when are we going to do a let's call it a partnership or even a sole proprietorship? Or what situations would we use those for?
So sole proprietorships and partnerships are used pretty often, but they don't help you limit the liability so much. Okay. So most businesses have risk, not all businesses. but most businesses over time will have risk once you grow a little bit. You're going to be a litigation target. It's sad, but it's true. Not because you did anything wrong, just because our system in California is really set up in a way that makes it easy to sue someone. And that's super unfortunate. So I really encourage people who are entrepreneurs to set up as some type of corporation or limited liability company. Same thing with partnerships. A lot of partnerships are very easily turned into either corporations or LLCs, or some cases, depending on if they qualify, like accountants, lawyers, engineers, you can set up as a limited liability partnership.
Okay.
Right.
And I've seen, too, with some of the entities I'm involved with, is there's a general partnership with limited partners, but there's an LLC that has an ownership, that type of thing. So
Exactly.
it can get kind of complex depending on what kind of company you intend to build.
It can. A lot of companies with a limited number of investors, a lot of land companies I see, and even some restaurants used to use this format too. There'll be a limited partnership. So, but then that general partner is some sort of limited liability entity, right? They're either an LLC or a corporation or something. So they have some protection, but they're the main partner. And then there are limited partners who don't have any risk. They are merely investors.
Okay, so now I kind of saved sort of a lot of I'll call that, some of that's like Main Street type of stuff. And then we have these tech companies that want to go out and they've got a big idea and they want to go raise money. And the Growth Factory, we invest into those type of companies, and we invest into C-Corps. We don't invest into S-Corps because all the pass-through stuff. If we want to be an owner, we don't want to deal with, a bunch of all the 1099s. And we typically just tell people, if you're going to go raise money from venture capitalists, angel investors, and then venture capitalists, you want to be a Delaware C-Corp or at least a C-Corp of some kind.
Absolutely.
Okay, explain why that is, and how you walk maybe a startup through that kind of thinking.
So there are a few reasons. One is you don't want to deal with the pass-through stuff. The other is if you're an S-Corp, you can't have different levels of stock. You can only have one type of share. There are other limitations too in terms of how many owners you can have. So really, if you're going to scale up, you need to be that C-Corp, right? And the main reason is going to be the different levels of shares, because the initial owners might want to have a different share than the investors. And depending on the amount of money invested, that investor should have some additional rights too, right? So that's the main reason that I find, right?
One of the things that I've seen and been involved with is somebody will bootstrap the business at the beginning. These startups, they lose money. You're investing money, you're building a product, but you got to start a company. And so you put your own money in it, and you want to take the losses yourself on your personal tax return. So you start off as a pass-through type of entity, and then, okay, it looks like I'm going to be taking on investors and other people's money, time to convert, and then now I got to do it correctly.
Exactly.
Or do it the way that venture capitalists prefer it.
Right, and that conversion isn't hard. It just needs to be done. It's just a step that has to happen, right?
So you can take your losses personally at the beginning as long as you're going to bootstrap it. But, if you're going to raise money within 6 months, you might as well just set up a C-Corp.
You may as well set it up the right way and set it up in a way that's going to be more attractive to your investors. If you know you're a company, if you're an augmented reality company, right? You're going to need money for something like that. A lot of IP. If there's something else, you're going to have to protect a lot and have manufacturing fees, whatever. You need a lot of dough. You may as well set up as the C-Corp. It's not hard. In fact, if you're just setting up a corporation, from my perspective, to be an S-Corp, I have to file an extra thing with the IRS. If not, you're automatically a C-Corp. So all corporations are automatically C-Corps to start. May as well start that way. It's easy if you know you're going to have investors.
Gotcha. And Delaware seems to have the best laws for, their design, their pro-business. I think I've got a Nevada C-Corp as one of my entities. Where do you recommend that California is not the recommendation on setting up a C-Corp?
Well, Delaware is often the best. California isn't bad if you're truly seated in California and that's where your main operations are. that's a big decision. I mean, I'd like to see everybody stay in California, but for lots of reasons, people aren't. But in terms of where the corporation
Why would you
okay,
I'm going to back off on that a second,
Yeah.
just so I understand that. So California has higher taxes. And so if you, in the event that you start making money someday, you're going to be paying higher taxes. I thought that we had more regulation on, maybe we don't in this realm, but that there's more regulation and stuff like that. And so if you get to a more pro-business oriented state, then it could help. Is that am I off base?
It won't help you with tax. I mean, not if you're doing business here and manufacturing here. It will help in terms of protecting the majority shareholders.
Okay, yeah.
Right?
If you're located here,
up,
then you're going to pay tax on wherever the business is. Yeah.
You are. If you're running part of your business here,
yeah.
Franchise Tax Board in California is going to find you and they're going to get you, right? Yeah. And you need to be registered to do business in all the states that you are actually functioning in, right? So, but Delaware does have some more favorable laws in terms of protecting key shareholders. So the majority owners are probably more protected in that sense. For a lot of corporations, it's not going to matter. It's certainly not going to matter for tax. And I see people set up in Delaware because they think it's going to matter for tax, and it's not.
Yeah, it's not going to matter.
It's not.
It's where you
right?
do business.
Yeah. No, right. Now, if you've got manufacturing plant and you're selling a lot of material in Nevada, great. Or you live in Nevada, wonderful. But it's going to be tough.
Okay, and then in terms of setting up a C-Corp, what are there any other benefits of setting up the C-Corp besides that, like for investors to be investing into a C-Corp and maybe get, especially on these tech companies that are growing, there's you don't pay tax on the first little bit of the gain on a sale. Right,
definitely that. And then it's just easier to set up either the debt structure, the equity structure, the varying levels of ownership, the preferred stock. It's just easier to carve out, not separate deals. I mean, you need to treat people fairly, but you can't have different classes of stock, and that's a big advantage. Lots of investors, depending on the amount of money they put in, they should be entitled to get a voice, to get a vote. Other people are simply investors, and maybe they're not going to have the same level of stock, right? There are a lot of reasons that you want to structure it differently.
Even thinking about something as simple as stock options. People think about that. If you want to give a stock option to your employee, and you don't want that. Anyway, I can just picture it's easier to carve that out. Yeah.
Right. What does that pool look like? How big is that pool going to be? What kind of rights are those employees going to have? Are those employees going to have the same rights as other investors? Right. Those types of things. And so much of that, and this as an investor, so much of that is going to be investor driven. Because if you've got a great idea and you don't have money to get it across the finish line, you're going to have to work with that investor, right? And while you don't want to, I always try to get my idea guys, my entrepreneurs, to keep as much as they can. But it's not practical to keep everything if you want a really big idea to grow, right?
Yeah, there's a quote that Scott gave me that apparently you said that says, treat equity like gold, not like candy.
Right. Absolutely. You've got to be careful with that.
And so what are the common mistakes that you see founders making in terms of doling out too much equity?
Well, they lose control, and then their company turns into something they didn't intend, or they're so diluted that they're not very important anymore. Their idea can be taken, and they can be something that's little more than a mere employee, right? So if you lose control, you could lose your whole company, aside from the idea that you might want to make a lot of money with this company. But aside from that, the very soul, so many entrepreneurs I deal with, their idea is their baby and they want to see it grow a certain way. And if you don't maintain enough control, that's going to be a mess.
Interesting. Even as an investor, we look at the founder's motivation. If he or she is diluted too much, they don't have a big enough stake in the business anymore. How inspired are they going to be to take this thing across the finish line? And so if we've seen somebody get completely diluted, we even get gun shy at some level. Right.
And for you as an investor, depending on the amount that's invested, it makes sense to have some certain weight and a voice. But I see a lot of people with very good ideas starting out, and maybe their buddies are helping them with this idea, and they're saying, oh, well, he's really helped me out with this marketing plan. I want to give him some equity. I'm like, well, can we just pay him?
Yeah.
You want your very key people to be your closest shareholders and partners, but not everybody needs to have equity. And that's what I meant. If someone is loaning you money, they're probably going to get some equity. But if someone is simply helping you with a project and they're very, you just think they did a great job and you're just starting out, that may not be the person you need to give equity.
Yeah, interesting. So I've seen that myself is like, hey, I got to do the right thing. I'm going to give him a third of the company. A third of the company? Okay.
Right.
You said just pay them. What if you can't pay them and you don't want to, complicate your cap table, right? Or the ownership, who owns the company. You don't want to get another owner. Are there other ideas that you suggest to them besides, paying them and giving them equity? Is there like phantom stock or, I don't know.
Well, California is a little tough, right? Because you can't even be any type of volunteer anymore without being paid. There used to be a time that you could be.
Oh, because there's employment laws that prohibit you from working and not getting paid minimum wage or whatever it is.
Exactly. So, and unless you're paid a certain amount, then you're going to have to be subject to overtime laws and everything else. So it's a little touchy. So I hate saying there aren't a lot of options, but certainly you can hire someone at a lower rate and have a bonus program based on what they accomplish for you, right? Or maybe you have that equity as a carrot. You need to be honest about it, right? But maybe they accomplish some big milestones for you before they get that equity. But don't just hand it out because you think they're going to do a good job. And when you're at a small level, know who you're giving equity to also. They're going to have a vote depending on the type of stock you give them, right? So you want to make sure that you all have the same philosophy in terms of where you want this company to go, right?
Yeah. Well, choosing a business partner, it's like, in some ways, it's like choosing a spouse because you're committed to the end, and if there's a breakup, it can be ugly. So you start giving away equity, you have a business partner in a sense.
Absolutely.
And that, you should be thinking what happens when that person quits. They're going to potentially have, a lot of leverage. And that can be uncomfortable.
Right. And you want that person to be a good decision maker who behaves properly in the business community, because you can be held liable for your business partner binding you to a contract, or making a bad decision for you, or making a misrepresentation to somebody about what you're going to do or what your product does, right? Mm-hmm. If you have somebody who's a little too salesy and goes past, normal puffing in terms of what can be delivered, you can be held liable for that. So yeah, it can be a lot. And then if there is a breakup, it is very much like a divorce. It's a business divorce. And part of the advice I give to people when they're starting out, if they have business partners or co-shareholders, is have a buy-sell agreement. Plan. It's like a prenup. Have your separation planned now, right? If you don't, we have the corporations code, and it's pretty messy, right? It's a difficult way to break up. So,
yeah. I mean, as in some ways, we might even be scaring a few people, but maybe. I would say a decent percentage of startups begin with more than one person working on the business, and it is not clear who owns what and how much and who's putting in all the work. It's one person typically owns the entity, and then somebody else is doing work. And so you mentioned some employment law stuff. I see a pretty decent percentage of people kind of disregarding employment law issues because it's such an early startup. They're not even sure they're going to make it. And look, we're just going to have to figure it out when we get there. And so they sort of, I guess, skirt that issue for as long as possible until maybe the employee starts complaining or asking for something, and then you got a problem.
Right. it's all great until it's not,
Yeah,
right?
until they think they've been treated unfairly.
Exactly. So you have a bunch of people working together. Maybe you have 3 or 4 people. One's the money guy, one's the idea guy, one's the guy who's, making it happen, right? And if you're not clear about who owns what, someone can then say, hey, I was an employee because you never gave me the shares or the interest, or you never finished what you said that you were going to do. Because often there's this idea and you think it's going to work out, and someone's putting time in and they think they're going to get paid somehow and they're not. And that can end up in a lot of messy litigation.
Yeah. And I've seen a lot of verbal, it's just an idea anyway at this stage, the chance of everything starts to go, and there's a lot of verbal discussions about we're partners, but maybe not, a lot of people think partners on 50-50 partners. Right. It's just kind of like an assumption. And the person who originated the idea might not, and is following through on that idea, might not see it the same way. And so these verbal contracts, I have to imagine, can get brought into the lawsuit potentially, or the claim.
They can, and this relates back to what you said earlier, because when I'm in the courtroom, it's about business law, it's not about criminal law. So when you talk about something lying, I see fewer liars. I see people who really believe their perspective. So you've got these people working together, and maybe one of them, she put in the money and she thought that she was going to own at least 75% because she put in 75% of the dollars, but she wasn't physically working there. Somebody else was. And he thought since he was there all the time, he was the main owner. And it really can be a mess.
So have those difficult conversations, use your best people skills, and have the difficult conversations and over communicate that and get it in writing, I suppose.
And get it on paper, right? That's the point, because since both people do believe what they're saying, those verbal agreements are really tough to figure out what the terms really were. So jotting things down is really helpful. I mean, preferably you come and have an attorney put it together for you, but if you don't do that, at least sit down, write down your ideas, and even put a signature on them, right? Basic things. Who's putting in what money? Who's going to own what percentage? Which of you is going to be taking a salary or getting money out sooner? Who's going to get paid back when? That sounds like a whole lot all of a sudden, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. So it's ideal to have an attorney help you with that. But if you don't do that, at least get your ideas on paper for ownership when you're working together. When you start to throw money around and something more valuable than money, time, you need to decide who owns what. It'll really help you later.
I haven't had an attorney on the show in probably, let's call it 12 months. I think the last time I did might have been about a year ago. And I asked the question, I'm thinking about when to hire an attorney, and, we're talking tech at some level. And I asked him where artificial intelligence might play a role in the legal, his job specifically, and in everybody's, world. And he sort of downplayed the idea that AI would replace an attorney. And of course, it's not going to replace the attorney completely, but at what level are you seeing artificial intelligence come in? And part of the reason I ask that is because I can type into ChatGPT to type me up a contract. Or you can do LegalZoom for that matter, but you can get pretty good legal advice using the free stuff. I have to imagine that there is artificial intelligence just swarming into review of documents and all the different things that we want to discover to make your life easier, but also creating more do-it-yourselfers simultaneously. So maybe just talk about AI and where it's playing right now and where you see it going.
I'm excited about AI. I mean, could it replace attorneys? I suppose. I mean, it could probably replace us all at one point. Yeah. But at the point we're at now, I see some efficiencies, some real efficiencies in my research. And the research libraries that I have, my libraries are all, of course, online, right? Mm-hmm. So the research libraries that I have are all using AI tools, Westlaw, Lexis. They're pretty good. They're not perfect. I used one on an issue last week, and it didn't include a time frame having to do with an updated statute, but it got most of it right. I've had clients bring to me basic term contracts that they've used ChatGPT to draft, and they are a good start.
Okay.
Right. Sometimes it'll take me a little more time because I have to redraft it because there's something about it that isn't right. But what I do get from that ChatGPT and is, especially I've got a couple of partners working together, they can put their ideas down pretty quickly in a form that they can then save. And it can be as simple if Ryan and I decide we're going to have an augmented reality product that we're not going to talk about here, but we're going to have this augmented reality product, and he's going to spend half the time in the business, and I'm going to do this. If they even get sort of an outline of that and bring it to me, I can do something with that to help protect them, right? That'll give me a launching pad for the ownership interest, the shareholder agreement. Then we can talk about the buy-sell. There's a lot of other detail, but I think AI is a gift.
Yeah. Okay. So for the do-it-yourselfer, it's a great way to start. And if you have something that's important, you're going to want to take it to an attorney after you've went through your AI process. Right. And then we're handing something to you that's more thought through and probably saves hours for you. It does.
And I'm seeing it give people a way to do something they can do in a lot of other formats. They just dictate their ideas. Part of it, depending on how you use GPT, if you're using it properly, you're going to get a nice developed document. But if you're just sort of using it to talk into it, you're going to at least get an outline of your own ideas back, right? Which 10 years ago, I didn't have people, you could use a dictaphone to do that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but people wouldn't always do that for me, right. Decide what you're going to do. If you're talking to your buddy, go ahead and get down what you want it to look like.
Well, I have to imagine, I agree with that 100%. Now, I have to imagine, though, the attorneys, every occupation, right? We see it in venture capital. We're using AI every day to help us make decisions on where we invest and what we want to do with our portfolio and so on. How do we help our portfolio? We can use artificial intelligence, and it saves a lot of human resources from having to do that. And we're able to accomplish more and do a better job. We actually give better service, if you will, because we've got AI helping us with great suggestions, and we don't have to connect dots that can be kind of complicated. The computer can do it instantaneously.
I'm looking forward to it simplifying litigation. It hasn't yet.
Okay.
But when I think about, I talked about how burdensome it could be, how many months, how many years. The discovery process has a lot of documents and questions. I can see how there will be a time not too far away when AI will create a much more efficient way of handling that overall. So just, assembling documents, getting answers together, everything else, compiling data efficiently and quickly, it should really help. So I have a lot of hope for it in our field in particular. Will it replace us? Well, I don't think completely, but
it's interesting to think about how it might infiltrate every part of our lives. But thinking about there's a lot of controversy right now with judges and biases and things like that, and wondering how AI might proof some of that stuff so that it's less likely to have an appeal or it's kind of gone through the smell test.
It's an interesting idea to think if the rules of civil procedure could be adapted to allow for a trier of fact, which is what we call a judge or a jury. If a trier of fact was part AI, quite a bit away from our current... The 12th juror
is actually an AI agent. That's interesting.
Right. I mean, it's quite a bit away from our Constitution and our current laws.
Interesting.
But there were certainly things... 40 years ago, I didn't know my main computer would be this little thing I kept in my pocket that some people call a phone, right? So I don't rule it out. And I think taking away the bias is really the greatest point. right? Because if something's just weighing data, if they've got the right data in, I mean, garbage in, garbage out, but if you've got the right data in, it seems like that bias could be eliminated. And I like that idea. Those are weird words from a girl who really, sort of has always admired the court and thought it was this very proper, important thing. But I like what you said there.
Yeah, just thinking about fairness and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think Scott made a list of questions for me. I was just kind of shooting a breeze here. So I'm looking at my notes here. Okay, so we have 10 questions that Scott, my main man over here, came up with. Let's see what he's got. These are some of the questions I've already asked you. Shoot, okay. Okay, let's talk about IP a little bit. So how should a founder who has a differentiated product think about protecting that product through patents or copywriting and all that kind of thing? Walk us through what we ought to be thinking about for defensibility for our product.
Okay, so if you've got a thing, like a physical thing, something that can be drawn, right? You're talking about a patent. You're talking about a product. And a lot of ideas too. So patent lawyers are pretty specialized. Patents are not something I do, but there are a lot of smart people who do. They're often engineers. They're often, technology people. They're often software people. But you definitely want a registered patent with the United States Patent Trademark Office, right? The USPTO. You want that registered when you've got that idea. If it's something that you came up with uniquely, we know how ideas work. If we look at ideas during the world, so it could be someone on the other side of the world thinking of something similar. You want to get that idea registered, right, and put it through that patent office. And when the patent's pending, it's your idea and someone else can't come in and take it, right? So when you have that great idea that is truly unique, you want to do that. Now, if your idea is more of a procedure, or let's say a song or music, or a written learning style perhaps, that can be committed to writing. That's something that's copyrightable, right? And there's a copyright office where you can register as well. You can have a common law copyright. When you see people put the little C on something, that is a way of saying this is mine. The important way to make that stick is to establish the date at which that was started. So that's not too hard to do right now. You could send yourself an email, and that would be a way that would do that. A long time ago, people used to mail things to themselves so they'd have a postal mark on it, right? You want to show that was yours first, right? Same thing with a trademark. You can have a common law trademark, but it's not hard to protect it through the United States Patent Trademark Office. And it's something you should do, because if you've got a very special looking mark, you don't want someone else to just copy it, slap it on their product, and act like it's theirs, right?
Right.
So if you take something like the Nike swoosh, back when that was on the first shoe, it wasn't a big deal. It was this cute little curve, right? Broken frisbee, whatever it was. But now it's a very powerful mark. It's worth a lot of money. It means a lot. And that was registered early on. So it was theirs, right? Along with, you can also trademark those taglines, right? Like, just do it. That's also owned by Nike. And I use Nike because it's so common.
So let me ask you about this, like the enforceability of somebody that was already using the slogan, just do it. Let's say there was a company out there using that, maybe some small business, and they've been using just do it since the 50s. And Nike started using it in the 70s or 80s or whenever they started. Does it have to do with like who started using it when, that proof, or is it who got it copyrighted or trademarked?
It's who was using it first, and then whether or not it's an infringement has to do with whether or not there's a possibility of confusion.
Okay.
Right? You're not supposed to copy somebody else's stuff, but the real test is whether or not it's confusing people and diluting your market, right?
So
and harming you with its theft.
Okay, so if somebody was using it in the 50s, they're first, that gives them an upper hand preference in one way. If Nike comes in and uses that same just do it, but these other people are in hardware or something like that, they're not in the shoe market or in apparel, there's no harm being created to this little hardware store.
There's not going to be harm to the hardware store, right? Hardware store was first. At some point, Nike's a pretty powerful mark. They might not want the hardware. They might think the hardware store is benefiting, and they might try to do something to move against the hardware store. Often, they might pay the hardware store off to stay in their lane.
Okay.
Not that, and I have no evidence that Nike has ever done that.
Right. Yeah.
But
I'm talking just because of names that we've
But certainly
of,
others do.
But whoever's first can keep using it if they've been using it.
That's right.
Okay.
It's theirs if it's first. You have to prove it's first, but right.
Okay.
First in time actually is the bigger right. So if you register, that's the thing. If you register your mark and someone else was using it first, your registry is subject to be canceled, right? There's a similar problem. If you have such a good trademark that it becomes common and is no longer unusual, then you can lose your mark. So an example of that would be Kleenex or Xerox, right? Because it's a point in time where rather than saying a facial tissue, everyone was saying, "Oh, pass me that Kleenex, please," right? So that's why Kleenex started adding the tagline, Kleenex facial tissue, right? And Xerox added whatever they were doing as well for the different product lines. Xerox copier, Xerox copy services. If your idea needs to start out as rather whimsical, but once it becomes a concrete something, then it's subject to challenge, right? And
it's interesting to think about where those, and I assume there's some subjectivity to this. I'm picturing a restaurant called The Waffle Shop,
right,
and another one that's called The Waffle Stand. And wow, the Waffle Shop's big, and they've been doing it forever as the Waffle Shop, and they dominate. And now somebody else thinks, you know what, I'm going to come in with the Waffle Stand. It sounds pretty similar. I'm not trying to create confusion. It's just that's the name I chose. Right. They might be able to stop you from using that.
They would stop you from doing that. There was an Instant Out in Southern California that came in around the time of In-N-Out. But they were using the same colors. They were required to stop doing that, right? Yeah. But to the contrary, if there's not confusion, you can't own a simple name. You can own a complicated name if you make up a name that's different. But if you have a simple name, I have a client. I'll talk about the portions of this that were filed that are public, right? I have a client named Outback Solutions, great website designer, right? Outback Steakhouse, when we were registering their mark, Outback Steakhouse didn't like that. And I mean, long story short, my client is still using his name, and it ended all very well because there's not a possibility of confusion, and you can't own anything as simple as the word Outback. My client's Australian. The Outback is just part of the country. So you can't own a really common word.
So I'm thinking about the potential risks here for going and getting something trademarked, and you go out there, I want to get this name trademarked. It's pretty good. I want to make, I'm just going to pick a name. This is an actual company, so I should, but it's the one that's coming to my mind. Smithville Coffee. And, I'm going to want it. That's a good name. I think I'm going to get that name trademarked because I'm thinking about expanding across the country, and there's already Smithville people out there like that, or just like your Outback story. And I go to get my trademark and I apply. Do they alert the rest of the Smithvilles around? There's it creates more of a high profile sort of scenario, and they could actually stop you and require that you do a cease and desist and maybe stop using the name.
It's a little tricky. So Smithville was actually their last name. They'd have a bigger right to use it, even though they can't create confusion. I had a client whose name was Cartier, and he had a Cartier website just because he wanted his name on a website that he could load pictures on. And Cartier Jewelers did actually ask him about it and wanted to buy it from him.
Okay.
Right? So it was a little unusual there. But with Smithville, the first step at the U.S. Patent Trademark Office, when you file your application, you're assigned to an attorney, and that attorney there looks at it, and he'd probably say, hey, this is too common. We can't protect this. And they probably wouldn't even let you do it. Or you'd get a kickback that said, hey, you can have Smithville coffee together, but you don't own Smithville. Like, you can't own Smithville. It's too common.
Okay.
If Smithville's their name, Smithville coffee together might be allowable.
Okay,
but you want something that's more whimsical than common. If a made-up name is the best name, right? So, like Idea Factory is a great name together, because idea and factory doesn't always combine, right? But you can't just have like idea. It's just too
common,
simple on its own, too common, right? You can't own something that common.
Okay, so I'm getting long-winded here with my questions, but let's talk about the Entrepreneurs Organization a little bit. And how long have you been a member of the Entrepreneurs Organization?
I've been a member 3 years, and this will be my second year on the board.
Okay, so I've been an EO member for 10 plus years, 12 years. I think in 2012 is when I joined, so I guess 13 years. So I've gotten a lot out of it, partially because I've been involved a long time. I've also had the opportunity to be on the board and be president and stuff like that. What do you get out of EO? Obviously, you're giving back. Being on the board is a commitment. They don't pay you to be on the board, obviously.
Right.
So what do you get out of EO?
Boy, I get a lot out of EO. I meet a lot of great people, overall the organization. We've got 105 members right now. So you meet people full of ideas, all kinds of business owners, all walks of life, all different ways of starting to get to that place where they can be an EO member, right? And then you have the opportunity to be in a forum, which is your own small group. I think 9 to 15 people, something like that. And the process in that small group is really helpful because it's not just giving advice. In fact, you're not supposed to give advice, right? It's experience share, which is a really powerful way to learn and to work your way out of a problem, or what I think of as a head knot, right? Like, when I've got a problem, if I can share that problem with a bunch of other smart people who are business owners who are going through a lot of the same things I am, and they tell me what they've been through, that's a super powerful way to learn. It's easier for an established business owner than just getting advice. Right? Because if you just get advice, those people in the room next time they see you are going to want to know if you followed up the exact same way, and you have your own set of advisors and lawyers and accountants, and maybe you just don't need straight advice, but you do want to hear what other people have been through, and that's super powerful. So that's a big piece of it. And then the relationships, right? Most important thing to me in my day-to-day life anyways, relationships. It's what's important with my clients, my friends, and then having a great relationship with someone else who's a business owner is such a good way to connect and learn, and you get to help them too, right?
It's interesting because one of the things that happened to me, I joined EO a long time ago, kind of on a whim. I don't need any clubs, okay.
Right.
I'm going to build my own business. I don't need anybody type of guy.
Right.
And then I joined, and there's a friendship that builds quickly with the people in your forum because there's a requirement to be open and honest and vulnerable. And so everybody gets to know each other really, really well, better than we know a lot of our other friends, and in different ways. Everybody's sharing the deep, dark secrets that we don't talk to that many people about. And so you get to know each other really, really well. And you realize everybody's just human. So your sounding board, or these people that are in this forum with you, they know you well. And that's kind of a unique experience.
It is. It's a huge gift. And there's confidentiality too. So that helps you share more, and the groups are set up so you're not with a competitor. So that makes you more comfortable. And there's stuff that, you don't want to have to unload on your employees, that would be a bad idea, right?
Yeah, they don't.
Right.
That could backfire.
That could backfire a lot. Maybe you don't want to stress your spouse out at that level every day about every single thing.
I don't.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So this gives you a group of people who are friends who want to hear about your business. Because I have a lot of friends who don't want to hear about my business. They like me for other reasons, but maybe they don't want to hear about my business. These people want to hear about my business, and our friendship is based on our interest in each other as humans, but also our interest in each other as entrepreneurs. So that's a unique little layer that's
cool.
Fun.
It is cool.
Yeah.
I feel like at some level I was sort of in between. I owned a couple of, I had sold my businesses and I owned a few businesses, but I wasn't in the day-to-day, I wasn't really a CEO. I wasn't in the day-to-day grind, so I had more free time, and I was kind of trying to decide what I want to do. But I feel like EO in many ways led me to starting this podcast. I joined EO. Hey, how can I help entrepreneurs and get to know more people? And then that led to angel investing and now the Growth Factory. And really what I'm doing today would not have happened if I wasn't inspired by the other entrepreneurs around the Sacramento region and around the world. You know, it's a global organization. Yeah. It really led me to my occupation today, which is, you know, so some of the things about EO is like, you know, because I think it costs $5-7 a year to do it. It's not cheap. But, you know, where's my return on investment? Well, if you think about the investment over time, you know, what is deciding the right career for yourself worth? What is, you know, having, you know, a number of lifelong friends worth? Some of these things that you can't really imagine just by joining, before you've joined the club. But once you get in, you're like, this is way different than being in the Chamber of Commerce potentially. And I don't know disparagement on a Chamber of Commerce, but it's just different.
I agree. It's different. There's a different level of connection, a much different level of sharing, and then a big focus on learning. And actually, you're one of the people who really took that to a whole new level, right? Because it's like, okay, let's give entrepreneurs
I had a lot to learn.
Well, let's give entrepreneurs a place where they can learn and grow and share, right? And that's kind of the whole idea of EO. And like I said, but you know, you literally put a building and a structure around that and processes around that in a really great way. So it's fun to see how you took being around a bunch of entrepreneurs to do something really huge for the entrepreneurial community.
Thank you. And I will say, you know, we're using the term EO as the Entrepreneurs Organization. It's the organization. And there are really people within EO that inspired me to, you know, try something like a podcast. There's a guy named Tom Candris who passed away. I called him when I had the idea of the podcast and radio show, and he's like, "That's the best idea. I wish I would have thought of it." And I was inspired by Jack Crawford, who is a venture capitalist, Impact Ventures, Steve Mills, who is also in investments at DCA, and other people that were helping entrepreneurs. And I'm like, they're helping entrepreneurs. What can I do? And so sharing the stories and helping educate a little bit led me to, you know, a lot more investing and a lot more of what I do today. But it was really people within EO that I connected with at a deeper level.
I wish I'd found them sooner because you know, in terms of being a lawyer, I was an associate attorney for the first 5 years of my practice. And then after that, I was a partner and then had a couple of partnerships and have had this particular firm for 20 years. And I have one other shareholder right now. But I wish I'd found this group of people sooner. It just would have helped me with so many problems, from, you know, growth to retention to just being able to, learning how to process stress, learning how to do accounting a different way, learning about new softwares. I just wish I'd found it sooner.
Me too. I wish I would have found it. And I don't know that it was really cranking back when I was, you know, building and selling companies, my first set of companies. But I could have used it because of my naivete. I still have it, but it's, you know, you get more, the older you get, the more wise, and the more that I do what I'm doing now, you just develop a little bit more confidence. And I wish I would have had it. I think it would have helped me with my confidence levels as I was growing my businesses and selling them and stuff like that. Okay, so as we wrap up, I want to give you the final word. Is there anything that I didn't ask about any of these topics or anything else that you would like to share with our audience? Any words of wisdom?
Oh gosh. Okay, I'll go the legal end on the words of wisdom.
Okay.
So go to see a lawyer earlier rather than later, right? If you've got a great idea, you're starting something up, just spend a little bit of time, maybe just take an hour, and have some of your ideas that you've perhaps talked to ChatGPT about, or that you just have in your head, or that you've just typed up, and see where you can roadmap this to have some protection going in. And then, a good lawyer can help you issue spot the things along the way where you're going to need some help, and the things along the way where you can be on your own. I don't want to paper people to death as a lawyer. I want to set them up well so they protect their ideas and their thoughts, and so they can go and be creative and run their businesses, right, and stay out of trouble. So
see the lawyer earlier, see the attorney earlier. I love it. Sheila, thanks for joining me on the show. Obviously, we got a lot of free legal advice today and inspiration, and it was definitely fun for me, so thank you.
So much fun talking to you. Thanks,
you.
Mark. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Thanks for watching today's show. My goal for every episode is that you find a takeaway, something tangible you can use in your business today. And if you have a comment about a favorite takeaway, feel free to put it in the box below. And if you have a topic that you'd like me to bring up on the show, don't forget to let me know. And also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to learn more about entrepreneurship. Because at Haney Biz, we are always by your side.